Hawthingdale House, a sprawling mansion on the edge of the desolate moor, had stood empty for nearly a century. Its stone walls were covered in ivy, and its windows, like dark eyes, stared blankly out over the mist-covered landscape. The villagers avoided it, whispering of the curses and tragedies that had befallen those who dared to inhabit its walls. Yet, despite its ominous reputation, the house had a new owner. Edmund Eddington, a reclusive scholar of the arcane, had purchased the house for a pittance, drawn by the promise of solitude and the allure of its mysterious past. He arrived on a gloomy autumn afternoon, the sky heavy with the threat of rain. His carriage rattled up the overgrown driveway, the wheels crunching on the gravel as he gazed up at the imposing structure that would be his home. The front doors groaned in protest as Edmund pushed them open, revealing a grand entrance hall shrouded in dust and shadow. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the only sound was the distant drip of water from a leaky roof. He took a deep breath, the chill of the house seeping into his bones, and stepped inside. The interior of Hawthingdale House was a labyrinth of dark corridors and forgotten rooms. Edmund wandered through the halls, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls. He marveled at the remnants of the house's former grandeur, ornate woodwork, faded tapestries, and crumbling statues that seemed to watch his every move. He made his way to the library, a vast room lined with towering bookshelves. Many of the volumes had been lost to time and neglect, their pages yellowed and brittle. But there were still treasures to be found, ancient tomes and grimoires filled with knowledge that had been forgotten by the outside world. This was where Edmund intended to spend most of his time, delving into the secrets of the past and furthering his studies. As night fell, the house seemed to come alive with the sounds of creaking wood and whispering drafts. Edmund settled into his study, a small room adjacent to the library, and lit a fire in the hearth. He unpacked his belongings, placing his books and research materials on the desk. The flickering light of the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, and Edmund couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The first few weeks passed uneventfully. Edmund spent his days reading and writing, exploring the house only when he needed a break from his studies. He found the solitude invigorating, the silence a welcome reprieve from the chaos of the outside world. But as time went on, strange things began to happen. It started with small, almost imperceptible occurrences. Books would be moved from their shelves. Doors that he was sure he had closed would be found ajar, and objects would disappear only to reappear in different rooms. Edmund dismissed these incidents as the product of his imagination, the result of spending too much time alone in the eerie old house. But then, the dreams began. Every night Edmund was plagued by vivid, unsettling dreams. He found himself wandering the halls of Hawthingdale House, the walls closing in around him as he chased shadows and echoes of voices he couldn't quite hear. The dreams grew more intense with each passing night, leaving him exhausted and on edge. One evening, as he sat by the fire, Edmund heard a faint tapping sound coming from the far corner of the room. He turned, his eyes straining to see in the dim light. There was nothing there. He dismissed it as the house settling, but the tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. He rose from his chair and approached the corner, the sound growing louder with each step. As he reached out to touch the wall, the tapping ceased, and he felt a cold, invisible hand brush against his own. He recoiled in shock, stumbling back and nearly knocking over a candlestick. His heart raced as he scanned the room, but there was no one there. He was alone. Shaken, he returned to his chair, his mind racing with thoughts of ghosts and restless spirit. He had read enough to know that such phenomena were not to be taken lightly. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Edmund decided to investigate the history of Hawthingdale House. He spent the next few days poring over old records and documents, piecing together the tragic story of the house and its former inhabitant. The house had been built in the late 18th century by Jonathan Hawthingdale, a wealthy merchant with a dark reputation. It was said that he had made his fortune through dubious means and that he dabbled in the occult. The house had been the scene of numerous unexplained deaths and disappearances, and many believed it was cursed. Edmund learned of Jonathan's daughter Emmeline, a beautiful young woman who had mysteriously vanished one stormy night. Her disappearance had been the subject of much speculation and gossip, and it was widely believed that her father had been involved. Jonathan himself had died shortly after, under mysterious circumstances, and the house had been abandoned ever since. Determined to find out what had happened to Emmeline, Edmund delved deeper into the house's secrets. He scoured every room, every hidden passage, searching for clues. It was in the attic, a dusty, forgotten space filled with old furniture and cobwebs, that he made his most startling discovery. Behind a large, rotting wardrobe, Edmund found a small door, barely visible in the dim light. He pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into the darkness. Lantern in hand, he descended the steps, his heart pounding in his chest. The staircase led to a hidden chamber, a room that had been untouched for decades. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with strange artifacts and occult paraphernalia. In the center of the room stood an altar, covered in symbols and runes that Edmund recognized from his studies. But it was the figure lying on the altar that drew his attention. A skeleton, draped in tattered remnants of a dress, its bony fingers clutching a locket. Edmund approached the altar, his lantern casting eerie shadows on the walls. He reached out and gently pried the locket from the skeleton's grasp. Inside the locket was a small portrait of a young woman, Emmeline Hawthingdale. Edmund felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the truth. Emmeline had been sacrificed, her life taken in some dark ritual. Her spirit was the one haunting the house, trapped in a limbo between life and death. As he stood there, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and he felt a cold presence behind him. He turned to see the ghostly figure of a young woman, her eyes filled with sorrow and longing. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Edmund's heart ached with sympathy. He knew he had to find a way to free her spirit, put an end to the curse that had plagued Hawthingdale House for so long. He spent the next few days studying the artifacts in the hidden chamber, searching for a way to break the spell that bound Emmeline's spirit. He discovered an ancient ritual, a rite of purification that could cleanse the house of its dark energy and release the trapped souls. The ritual required several rare ingredients, which Edmund managed to procure through his extensive network of contacts in the occult community. On the night of the full moon, Edmund prepared for the ritual. He set up an altar in the grand entrance hall, placing the necessary ingredients and artifacts in their proper positions. He lit candles and incense, the flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. As he began to chant the ancient incantations, the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. The house seemed to tremble, the walls closing in around him, as if the very structure were resisting his effort. But Edmund pressed on, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each verse. Suddenly, the candles were extinguished, plunging the hall into darkness. A cold wind swept through the room, and Edmund felt a chilling presence surround him. He continued to chant, his voice unwavering as he called upon the spirits to be released. The temperature dropped further, and Edmund could see his breath in the frigid air. He felt a cold hand brush against his cheek, and he opened his eyes to see Emmeline's ghost standing before him. Her eyes were filled with fear and desperation, her lips moving silently as she mouthed the words, "Help me." Edmund reached out to her, his hand passing through her ethereal form. He continued the ritual, his voice rising in a crescendo as he called upon the ancient powers to cleanse the house. The air crackled with energy, and he could feel the presence of other spirits, their eyes watching him from the shadows. With a final powerful incantation, Edmund completed the ritual. A blinding light filled the room, and he felt a surge of energy wash over him. The house seemed to shudder, and he heard the sound of distant voices crying out in relief. When the light faded, the hall was silent. The oppressive presence that had plagued the house was gone, and the air felt lighter, purer. Edmund looked around, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Emmeline's ghost was nowhere to be seen, and he knew that her spirit had been freed. Exhausted but triumphant, Edmund collapsed into a nearby chair. He had done it. He had broken the curse and freed the trapped souls of Hawthingdale House. The house, once a place of darkness and despair, now felt peaceful, its haunted past finally laid to rest. Over the following months, Edmund continued his work, documenting the history of Hawthingdale House and the ritual that had freed its spirits. He received numerous visitors, scholars, and curious individuals alike, all eager to hear the tale of how Hawthingdale House had been cleansed of its dark past. Edmund became somewhat of a local legend, known not only for his scholarly pursuits, but also for his bravery in confronting the supernatural. However, the peace that had settled over Hawthingdale House was not to last. As winter set in, bringing with it long, cold nights and a blanket of snow over the moor, Edmund began to notice subtle changes in the atmosphere of the house. The sense of calm that had followed the ritual started to fray at the edges, replaced by a growing tension that he couldn't quite explain. It began with the return of the dreams. Vivid and unsettling, they were more intense than ever before. Edmund found himself wandering the darkened halls of the house, pursued by shadowy figures and echoing whispers. He would wake in a cold sweat, the lingering sense of dread clinging to him like a shroud. Then the tapping sound returned, louder and more insistent. It echoed through the house at all hours of the day and night. No longer confined to the study, it seemed to follow him wherever he went, a constant reminder that something was not right. Determined to uncover the source of the disturbances, Edmund redoubled his efforts. He spent hours each day exploring the house, searching for any clue that might explain the return of the supernatural phenomena. He consulted his books and corresponded with other scholars, but the answers eluded him. One stormy night, as the wind howled outside and the tapping sound reached a fever pitch, Edmund decided to return to the hidden chamber beneath the attic. He hoped that revisiting the place where he had first encountered Emmeline's spirit might provide some insight into the new disturbances. Lantern in hand, he climbed the narrow staircase and made his way to the hidden door. As he descended into the chamber, the air grew colder, and he felt the now familiar presence of the supernatural pressing in around him. The room was exactly as he had left it, the artifacts and symbols undisturbed. Edmund approached the altar where Emmeline's skeleton had lain, now gone to its proper resting place. He examined the surrounding shelves, looking for anything he might have missed before. As he reached for an old, dust-covered book, a sudden gust of wind extinguished his lantern, plunging the room into darkness. He fumbled for matches, his hands trembling, and managed to relight the lantern. As the light flickered back to life, he saw something that made his blood run cold. On the wall behind the altar, written in what appeared to be blood, was a single word: beware. Edmund stepped back, his mind racing. Who or what could have left such a message? The ritual had freed Emmeline's spirit, of that he was certain. But it seemed that something else had been awakened, something far more malevolent. In the days that followed, the disturbances grew more frequent and violent. Objects were thrown across rooms, doors slammed shut with deafening force, and the tapping sound evolved into a cacophony of banging and crashing that seemed to come from all directions at once. Edmund began to fear for his safety, but his determination to uncover the truth kept him rooted to the spot. One night, as he sat by the fire, the room suddenly grew unbearably cold. The flames in the hearth flickered and then died out, leaving him in darkness. He felt a cold hand on his shoulder and turned to see a shadowy figure looming over him. It was not Emmeline, but something darker, more menacing. The figure spoke, its voice a harsh whisper that seemed to cut through the silence like a knife. You should have left well enough alone, Edmund Eddington. This house is ours, and we will not be banished so easily. Before Edmund could respond, the figure vanished, leaving him alone in the darkness. He knew that he was dealing with a force far more powerful than he had anticipated. The ritual had indeed freed Emmeline's spirit, but it had also unleashed something far more sinister. Determined to put an end to the haunting once and for all, Edmund decided to perform another ritual, one that would banish the dark spirits from Hawthingdale House forever. He knew it would be dangerous, but he was willing to risk everything to save the house and himself from the malevolent force that had taken hold. He spent days preparing, gathering the necessary ingredients and studying the ancient text. The ritual would require him to confront the spirits directly, to face their wrath and command them to leave. He steeled himself for the challenge, knowing that failure was not an option. On the night of the new moon, when the darkness was at its most complete, Edmund began the ritual. He set up an altar in the grand entrance hall, placing the artifacts and ingredients in their proper positions. He lit candles and incense, the flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. As he began the incantations, the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. The house seemed to tremble, the walls closing in around him as if the very structure were resisting his efforts. But Edmund pressed on, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each verse. Suddenly, the candles were extinguished, plunging the hall into darkness. A cold wind swept through the room, and Edmund felt a chilling presence surround him. He continued the chant, his voice unwavering as he called upon the spirits to be banished. The temperature dropped further, and Edmund could see his breath in the frigid air. He felt a cold hand brush against his cheek, and he opened his eyes to see the shadowy figure standing before him once more. Its eyes burned with an unholy light, and its presence seemed to suck the very warmth from the room. "You are a foolish mortal, Edmund Eddington," the figure hissed. "You cannot banish us. This house is ours, and you will never be free of us." Edmund's voice wavered, but he continued the ritual, his determination unwavering. He called upon the ancient powers, demanding that the spirits be banished from the house. The air crackled with energy, and he could feel the presence of other spirits, their eyes watching him from the shadows. With the final powerful incantation, Edmund completed the ritual. A blinding light filled the room, and he felt a surge of energy wash over him. The house seemed to shudder, and he heard the sound of distant voices crying out in pain and anger. When the light faded, the hall was silent. The oppressive presence that had plagued the house was gone, and the air felt lighter, purer. Edmund looked around, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The shadowy figure was nowhere to be seen, and he knew that the dark spirits had been banished. Edmund collapsed in his bed, his mind reeling. He had freed Hawthingdale House from the malevolent spirits that had haunted it for so long. The house was finally free of the past. Moving forward, Edmund continued his work, and more visitors came to hear the tale of how the house had been cleansed of its dark past. But the house remained empty, a silent sentinel on the edge of the moor. Edmund, though freed of the immediate threat of the spirits, could never shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the shadows held secrets he had yet to uncover. He continued his studies, delving deeper into the mysteries of the occult, but always with a sense of caution. He knew that some knowledge was too dangerous to possess, and that the darkness could never be fully banished. But he also knew that he had faced the unknown and emerged victorious, and that Hawthingdale House would forever be a testament to his courage and determination. And so, Edmund Eddington lived out his days in the sprawling mansion, a solitary guardian of its secrets, ever watchful for the return of the unseen hand that had once held him in its grasp.